Scarlett's sneakers squeaked against the worn wooden floor as she pushed open the heavy door of the old Riverside Dance Academy. The building had been abandoned for 2 years, but somehow the electricity still worked. Probably an oversight by the city. She didn't question her luck. She just needed a place to practice where the neighbors wouldn't complain about the noise. Her day had started at 5 a.m. with her shift at the diner, followed by 4 hours cleaning office buildings downtown. By evening, her body ached, but her soul craved movement. Dance was the only thing that made sense anymore, the only thing that felt like home since she'd lost everything. The studio was a ghost of its former glory. Mirrors hung cracked on the walls, and dust motes danced in the fading sunlight that streamed through broken windows. But the floor was still good, still smooth enough for her purposes. She'd been coming here for 3 weeks now, always careful to check that she was alone, always leaving before full darkness fell. She set her phone on the windowsill and pressed play. The haunting melody of a contemporary piece filled the empty space, and Scarlett closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When she began to move, the world outside ceased to exist. Her body remembered every lesson from her childhood, every correction from teachers who'd seen her potential. She'd been good once, really good. Scholarship to Juilliard good, but life had other plans. Her mother's cancer diagnosis had come during her sophomore year, and Scarlett had dropped out to care for her. The medical bills had eaten through their savings like acid, and when her mother died 2 years later, her father couldn't handle the grief. He'd left one morning with nothing but a note saying he was sorry. At 26, Scarlett was alone in a city that chewed up dreamers and spit them out. But here in this forgotten space, she could still fly. 3 blocks away, Luciano de Santis sat in the back of his black Escalade, reviewing reports from his lieutenants. The numbers were good, their shipping operations were expanding, and the new alliance with the Colombians was proving profitable. At 32, he controlled the most powerful crime family on the East Coast, a position he'd inherited at 25, when his father was gunned down by rivals. Luca had spent 7 years building an empire of respect and fear. He owned judges and politicians, controlled the docks and half the construction in the city. His word was law in 12 neighborhoods, and his name was whispered with reverence and terror in equal measure. But tonight something felt different. Restless. Empty. "Boss, we should head back," his driver Tony suggested. "The meeting with the Colombians is in an hour." Luca nodded absently, but as they drove past the old dance academy, something caught his eye. Light spilled from the second-floor windows, and for a split second, he saw a figure moving with impossible grace. "Stop the car!" Tony's eyebrows shot up. "Boss, I said stop." The Escalade pulled to the curb and Luca stepped out, his Italian leather shoes silent on the cracked sidewalk. He'd walked these streets as a boy, knew every building, every alley. The dance academy had been closed since the owner couldn't pay his protection fees to the Torino family, Luca's rivals who controlled this particular block. He shouldn't be here. This was enemy territory, and walking alone was dangerous even for him. But something pulled him forward, up the rusted fire escape, toward the music that seemed to call to his very soul. Through the broken window, he saw her. Scarlett moved like she was born from the music itself, every gesture fluid and purposeful. Her red hair flew around her shoulders as she spun, and when she leaped, she seemed to defy gravity. Luca had seen the most expensive ballets at Lincoln Center, had dated socialites who'd trained at prestigious academies, but nothing had prepared him for this raw, honest beauty. She wore simple black leggings and a tank top that had seen better days, but she moved like a queen. Her face was flushed with exertion and joy, completely lost in her art. Every movement told a story, of pain transformed into beauty, of dreams that refused to die despite impossible odds. For the first time in years, Luca forgot about territories and rivals and the weight of his name. He forgot about the gun holstered beneath his jacket and the blood on his hands. He forgot about everything except the woman who danced like she was painting light across the darkness. Inside the studio, Scarlett felt the familiar rush of endorphins as she pushed her body to its limits. This was her sanctuary, her escape from a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. She'd been dancing since she was 3, had dreams of Broadway and touring companies, but life had taught her that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. Still, she couldn't stop. Dance was in her blood, in her bones, in the very rhythm of her heartbeat. Even if no one ever saw her perform again, even if she spent the rest of her life serving coffee and cleaning offices, she would always have this. These stolen moments when she could be exactly who she was meant to be. As the song reached its crescendo, she executed a series of turns that would have made her old instructors weep with pride. Her body moved with muscle memory and pure instinct, every line perfect, every transition seamless. She didn't see the shadow in the window, didn't feel the intense gaze that followed her every movement. The music ended, and Scarlett collapsed to the floor, breathing hard, but smiling. For 20 minutes, she'd been exactly who she was meant to be. For 20 minutes, she'd been free. Outside, Luca stood transfixed. He'd built his life on control, on calculated moves and strategic thinking. Every decision was weighed against profit and power, every relationship measured by its usefulness to the family. But watching this unknown woman dance had shattered something inside him, had awakened a hunger he didn't understand. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was something pure about her movement, something untouched by the corruption that surrounded him daily. She danced like she still believed in magic, like she still had hope despite whatever circumstances had brought her to this abandoned building. His phone buzzed. A text from his underboss. "Where are you? Colombians are here." Reality crashed back. Luca was the head of a crime family with responsibilities and enemies, and a reputation to maintain. She was, what? A dancer practicing in an abandoned building in rival territory. Their worlds couldn't be more different. But as he climbed back down the fire escape, Luca knew he'd be back. He had to know who she was, had to understand what it was about her that had reached into his chest and grabbed his heart with both hands. Inside the studio, Scarlett gathered her things, unaware that her life had just changed forever. She carefully locked the door behind her. The lock was broken, but she went through the motions anyway. Tomorrow she'd return to her 3 jobs and her tiny apartment with the broken heater. But tonight, she'd danced like the star she'd always dreamed of being. As she walked to the bus stop, she whispered a small prayer of gratitude for this hidden sanctuary. She had no idea that the most dangerous man in the city had just become her most devoted audience, or that her simple act of dancing had set in motion events that would transform both their lives forever. The city lights blurred past the bus window as Scarlett headed home, her body tired, but her spirit soaring. In a few days, she'd return to the studio, and her mysterious watcher would be waiting in the shadows, drawn back by a beauty he couldn't resist and a purity he'd forgotten existed. Neither of them knew it yet, but their story had already begun. For 3 weeks, Luca found excuses to drive past the dance academy. He learned her schedule, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays at sunset. He told himself he was just curious, that it was a momentary fascination that would fade. But each time he watched her dance, the pull grew stronger. His men began to notice his distraction. During meetings, his mind would wander to red hair catching sunlight and graceful arms painting stories in the air. He found himself checking his watch, calculating how long until her next practice session. It was madness, and he knew it, but he couldn't stop. Scarlett had no idea she was being watched. The studio had become her lifeline as her world continued to crumble. The diner had cut her hours due to slow business, and her landlord was threatening eviction if she couldn't come up with next month's rent. Her savings account had exactly $47, and her credit cards were maxed out. But for those precious hours each week, she could forget everything and just be. She'd started bringing different music, experimenting with styles she'd never had the courage to try before. Contemporary, jazz, even some hip-hop fusion that made her feel young and free. The abandoned studio had become her laboratory, her safe space to explore and grow without judgment. On a rainy Thursday evening, everything changed. Scarlett arrived at the studio to find the door slightly ajar. Her heart sank. Had someone broken in? Had her sanctuary been discovered? She pushed the door open cautiously and froze. A man stood with his back to her, looking out the rain-streaked windows. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and even from behind, he radiated an authority that made her stomach flutter with nerves. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know anyone was here. I'll leave." Luca turned slowly, and Scarlett's breath caught. He was devastatingly handsome, sharp cheekbones, intense dark eyes, and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, but it was the way he looked at her that made her pulse race, like she was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "Don't leave," he said, his voice low and accented with just a hint of Italian. This is your space. I don't understand. Scarlett clutched her dance bag tighter. Do you own this building? Luca stepped closer and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something dangerous, something that made her instincts scream both warning and attraction. Not exactly, but I've been watching you dance. The words should have terrified her. A strange man admitting to watching her should have sent her running, but something in his eyes, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his commanding presence, kept her frozen in place. That's... she started, then stopped. How long? 3 weeks. His honesty was brutal and somehow reassuring. You're extraordinary. Scarlett felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm just practicing. I'm not even that good anymore. I haven't had proper training in years. You're wrong. Luca moved closer, and she could see the intensity in his dark eyes. I've seen the best dancers in the world. None of them move like you do. Who are you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. For a moment, Luca hesitated. In his world, names had power, and his name in particular carried weight that could crush or elevate. But looking at this woman, this beautiful, talented woman who danced like an angel in an abandoned building, he wanted to be just a man. Luca, he said finally, and you're Scarlett. Her eyes widened. How do you know my name? Before he could answer, the sound of screeching tires and shouting voices erupted from the street below. Luca's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The gentle man who'd been admiring her art vanished, replaced by someone cold and lethal. Get away from the windows, he ordered, his voice sharp with command. What's happening? Scarlett's voice shook as she heard what sounded like gunshots. Luca was already moving, pulling out a phone and speaking in rapid Italian. She caught fragments, territorio, Torino, adesso, but the meaning was lost on her. His transformation was complete and terrifying. This was not a man who watched dance recitals and donated to charity. This was someone dangerous. More shots rang out, closer this time. Luca grabbed her arm, his touch firm, but not painful. Even in crisis mode, he was careful with her. We need to leave. Now. I don't understand what's happening, Scarlett protested, but she let him guide her toward the back exit. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the sudden shift from intimate conversation to what sounded like a war zone. The Torino family controls this block, Luca explained tersely as they moved. They don't like trespassers. The Torino family? Scarlett's blood ran cold. Even she knew that name. It was whispered in the neighborhood, associated with violence and fear. Are you? Not now. Luca cut her off. Questions later. Safety first. They reached the back door and Luca peered out carefully before motioning for her to follow. His black Escalade was parked in the alley, engine running. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, his hand inside his jacket, in a way that suggested he was armed. Boss, the man called urgently, we need to go. Torino's men are moving in from both ends of the street. Boss? Scarlett's mind reeled as pieces began falling into place. The expensive suit, the way he'd known about the Torinos, the deference in the other man's voice, the practiced way he'd assessed the danger and moved them to safety. Luca turned to her, and for a moment, his mask slipped. She saw regret in his eyes, and something that might have been longing. I'm sorry you had to see this, he said softly, but I couldn't let anything happen to you. Who are you really? She whispered. Before he could answer, another burst of gunfire echoed from the street. Luca's jaw tightened, and he made a decision that would change everything. Someone who should stay away from you, he said, but I don't think I can. He helped her into the Escalade, his hand warm and steady on her back. As they drove away from the chaos, Scarlett caught glimpses of men in dark clothing moving through the shadows, the glint of weapons in the streetlights. This wasn't a random crime. This was organized, territorial, deadly. Where are you taking me? She asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Somewhere safe, Luca replied, not taking his eyes off the mirrors. My men will make sure you get home safely once the area is clear. Your men? Scarlett studied his profile in the dim light of the car. You're not just some businessman who likes dance, are you? Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. No, Bella, I'm not. The endearment sent a shiver through her despite everything. Bella, beautiful. The way he said it made it sound like a prayer. What are you then? Luca met her eyes in the rearview mirror, and she saw the exact moment he decided to tell her the truth. "I'm Luciano DeSantis. I'm the head of the DeSantis crime family." The words hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Scarlett felt the world tilt sideways as everything clicked into place. The expensive clothes, the deference from his men, the way he'd known about territorial disputes, the practiced efficiency with which he'd handled the crisis. "You're in the Mafia," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, his honesty was brutal, and somehow made it worse. Scarlett stared out the window at the city passing by, trying to process what she'd just learned. The man who'd watched her dance with such reverence, who'd spoken to her with such gentleness, was a criminal. A dangerous one, judging by the fear in his driver's voice and the military precision of their escape. "I need to go home," she said finally. "Of course." Luca's voice was carefully neutral. "Tony will take you wherever you need to go." But as they drove through the night, Scarlett couldn't shake the memory of how he'd looked at her in the studio. Like she was something precious, something worth protecting. Whatever Luciano DeSantis was, whatever he'd done, he'd just risked his life to keep her safe. And that terrified her more than any gunfight ever could. Luca's penthouse overlooked the city like a kingdom, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern luxury that screamed power and money. Scarlett stood in the center of the living room 3 days later, still wearing her waitress uniform from the diner, feeling completely out of place among the Italian marble and priceless art. She hadn't planned to come here. After that night at the studio, she'd tried to go back to her normal life, tried to forget about dark eyes and gentle hands and the way he'd said her name like it was sacred. But the Torino incident had made the news. 3 dead, several wounded, and the Dance Academy building had been burned to the ground in retaliation. Her sanctuary was gone, and with it, the only place she'd felt truly alive in years. "You came," Luca said from behind her, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway. He looked different in his own space, younger somehow, more vulnerable. He'd traded his suit for dark jeans and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms, marked with what looked like scars. "I didn't know where else to go," Scarlett admitted. "The studio." "I know. I'm sorry." The pain in his voice was genuine. "This is my fault." "Is it?" She studied his face, looking for deception and finding only regret. Or would it have happened anyway? Luca moved closer, careful not to crowd her. "The Torinos have been pushing into our territory for months. That night was inevitable. But you being there, me being there," he ran a hand through his hair. "That was my choice. And it put you in danger." Scarlett sank onto the leather couch, suddenly exhausted. "I keep thinking about what you said about being someone who should stay away from me. I meant it." "Then why did you give me your address?" She pulled the business card from her pocket. Heavy stock, expensive printing, with only his name and a phone number. Luca's smile was sad and self-aware. "Because I'm selfish. Because watching you dance was the first time in 7 years that I remembered what beauty looked like, what peace felt like." "Tell me about those 7 years," Scarlett said softly. "Tell me who you really are." Luca poured himself a glass of whiskey with steady hands, then sat across from her. In the soft lighting of his home, she could see the weight he carried, the exhaustion that went bone deep. "My father was Antonio DeSantis," he began. "He built this family from nothing, turned us from street thugs into a legitimate power. He had rules: no drugs, no human trafficking, no unnecessary violence. He believed in honor, in protecting our neighborhood, in taking care of our own." "What happened to him?" "The Torinos happened." Luca's voice hardened. "They wanted our shipping contracts, our political connections. When my father refused to share, they decided to take everything instead. They gunned him down outside his favorite restaurant on my 25th birthday. Scarlett felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry. I had a choice that night," Luca continued. "I could walk away, let the family dissolve, try to build a normal life. Or I could take my father's place and make sure his killers paid for what they'd done. What did you choose?" Luca met her eyes, and she saw the cost of that choice written in every line of his face. "I chose revenge. I chose power. I chose to become someone I never wanted to be." "Who did you want to be?" A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "An architect. I had a full scholarship to Columbia, plans to design buildings that would make the city more beautiful. I wanted to create instead of destroy." Scarlett tried to imagine him as a young man with dreams and blueprints, before violence and responsibility had carved away his innocence. "Do you ever regret it?" "Every day. The admission was barely a whisper. But regret doesn't bring back the dead or undo the choices I've made. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession settling between them. Scarlett knew she should leave, should walk away from this dangerous man and his complicated world. But looking at him, really looking at him, she saw something that called to her heart. The night my mother died, she found herself saying, I danced for 12 hours straight, until my feet bled and I collapsed from exhaustion. It was the only way I could survive the pain. Luca's eyes softened. How old were you? 19. Cancer took her in 6 months. Scarlett wrapped her arms around herself, remembering. My father left the next week, said he couldn't handle the memories, couldn't look at me without seeing her. That must have been devastating. I've been surviving ever since, she continued. 3 jobs, a tiny apartment, dancing in abandoned buildings because I can't afford studio time. But when I dance, I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. Luca leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You make me want to live instead of just survive. The confession hung between them, dangerous and beautiful. Scarlett felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than attraction or sympathy. This man understood loss, understood the weight of impossible choices. This is insane, she whispered. Yes, Luca agreed. Completely insane. You're dangerous. Extremely. I should run. You should. His voice was rough with want and regret. But I'm hoping you won't. Scarlett looked into his eyes and saw her own longing reflected back at her. This man, this beautiful, dangerous man, saw something in her that no one else ever had. He watched her dance like she was magic, spoke to her like she mattered, like she was worth protecting. If I stay, she said quietly, what happens to me? I protect you, Luca said without hesitation, with my life, if necessary. And if I leave, pain flashed across his features. Then I make sure you're safe, and I try to forget the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Scarlett's heart hammered against her ribs as she made her choice. She stood up, and for a moment, Luca looked like he was bracing for her to walk away. Instead, she moved closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. I don't want you to forget, she whispered. Luca's control finally snapped. He stood and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. Scarlett, he breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might disappear. But when she melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, he deepened it with a hunger that made her knees weak. He tasted like whiskey and promises, like danger and salvation all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Scarlett knew there was no going back. She'd stepped into his world, and whatever came next, they'd face it together. What happens now? She asked against his lips. Luca's smile was soft and dangerous and full of promise. Now, Bella Mia, everything changes. He was right. Everything was about to change in ways neither of them could imagine. 3 months later, Scarlett's life had transformed beyond recognition. Luca had moved her into a secure apartment in his building, enrolled her in the city's most prestigious dance academy, and surrounded her with protection she barely noticed but always felt. She was living her dreams, but the cost was becoming clear. She couldn't go anywhere alone, couldn't visit her old neighborhood, couldn't maintain friendships that might put others at risk. Her world had become beautiful and golden and completely isolated. The Riverside Dance Academy, rebuilt and renamed the Scarlett Williams Academy for the Arts, was everything she'd ever dreamed of. State-of-the-art facilities, world-class instructors, and a full scholarship program for underprivileged children. It was Luca's gift to her, and she loved it with every fiber of her being, but she was beginning to understand the true cost of loving a man like Luciano De Santis. "You're distracted today," Madame Petrova, her new instructor, observed as Scarlett stumbled through a combination she'd nailed the day before. "I'm sorry," Scarlett said, catching her breath. "I'll focus." But focus was impossible when her mind was consumed with questions she was afraid to ask. Luca was gentle with her, protective and passionate, but she saw the darkness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She heard him on phone calls conducted in rapid Italian, saw the tension in his shoulders when his men brought him reports. 2 nights ago she'd woken to find his side of the bed empty. She'd found him standing on the balcony at 3 in the morning, staring out at the city with blood on his knuckles and death in his eyes. When she'd asked what happened, he'd simply said, "Business," and held her until dawn. That evening she found him in his study, staring out at the city with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired in a way that went bone deep, and there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. "Bad day?" she asked softly. Luca turned, and his expression immediately softened when he saw her. "Better now." She moved to him, letting him pull her against his chest. For a moment, they just held each other, finding peace in the simple contact. But Scarlett could feel the tension in his body, the weight of whatever he was carrying. "Luca," she said finally, "I need to ask you something." She felt him tense slightly. "What is it, Bella?" "The things you do? The family business?" She pulled back to look at his face. "How bad is it really?" Luca was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. "Why are you asking?" "Because I love you," she said simply, "and I need to know what that means." The words hung between them. It was the first time either of them had said it, and Scarlett saw the impact hit him like a physical blow. Joy and terror warred in his expression. "Scarlett," he started, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. "I love you," she repeated, "but I can't love a lie. I need to know who you really are, all of who you are." Luca closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, she saw resignation there. "If I tell you, you might not be able to look at me the same way. Try me." He set down his whiskey and took her hands in his. His fingers were warm and strong, but she could feel the slight tremor that betrayed his nerves. "I've killed people, Scarlett. Not in passion, not in self-defense, but because it was necessary for business. I've ordered hits on rivals. I've destroyed families who crossed us." Scarlett felt the blood drain from her face, but she didn't pull away. "How many?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." Luca's jaw tightened. 17. Directly. More indirectly through orders I've given. The number hit her like a slap. 17 people who would never go home to their families, never dance or laugh or love again, because of the man she loved. "The Torino family," she said quietly. "The night we met. What happened after we left? 3 of their soldiers died in the shootout with my men. 2 more died in retaliation strikes over the following week." Scarlett pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself. "Because of me. Because you were there watching me." "No." Luca's voice was sharp. "Because they were moving into our territory. Because this war has been brewing for months. You were just the catalyst." "I don't know if that makes it better or worse." They stood in silence, the weight of his confession settling between them like a wall. Scarlett felt like she was drowning, caught between the man who held her so tenderly and the killer he'd just admitted to being. "There's more," Luca said quietly. Scarlett's heart sank. "What?" "The dance academy where I first saw you. I didn't just have it rebuilt." Luca's voice was carefully controlled. "I bought the entire block, forced out the businesses that wouldn't sell, displaced families who'd lived there for generations." "What do you mean?" "I mean I destroyed a community to build you a dream." The self-loathing in his voice was palpable. "The grocery store where Mrs. Chen had worked for 30 years. The barber shop that had been in the Rodriguez family for 3 generations. The apartment building where 12 families raised their children. All gone, because I wanted to give you something beautiful." Scarlett stared at him, torn between gratitude and horror. "You displaced 12 families for me? I gave them compensation, more than their places were worth. But yes, I forced them out. With blood money." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but she couldn't take them back. Luca flinched as if she'd struck him. "Yes," he said simply, "with blood money." Scarlett turned away, her mind reeling. Everything beautiful in her new life, the apartment, the lessons, the academy, the security, all of it was built on violence and displacement. How could she accept gifts paid for with other people's lives and homes? "I need time to think," she said without turning around. "Scarlett, please. I said I need time." The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Luca went very still behind her, and she could feel the dangerous energy that always lurked beneath his surface. "Of course," he said quietly. "Take all the time you need." But as Scarlett walked toward the door, she heard him add, almost too softly to catch, "Just remember that loving someone doesn't mean loving everything they've done. It means loving who they're trying to become." She paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorknob. "And who are you trying to become, Luca?" When she turned back, his eyes were full of pain and hope and desperate love. "Someone worthy of you," he said. Scarlett felt her heart crack open. This man, this beautiful, dangerous, broken man, was trying to build something good from the ashes of his choices. But was love enough to bridge the gap between their worlds? Was love enough to wash the blood from his hands and the displacement from her dreams? As she left him standing alone in his study, she realized that the hardest part wasn't learning to love a killer. It was learning to love herself for doing it, and figuring out if she could live with the cost of that love. The answer to that question would determine everything. For 2 weeks, Scarlett stayed in the guest room of Luca's penthouse, close enough to feel his presence, but far enough to think clearly. He respected her space, never pushing, never demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. But she could see the toll it was taking on him, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he stood on the balcony late at night, staring out at the city like he was searching for absolution in the lights. During the day, she threw herself into teaching at the academy. The children were her salvation, their pure joy in movement, their uncomplicated dreams, their ability to find beauty in the simplest combinations. When 8-year-old Emma mastered a difficult turn sequence, when teenage Marcus finally found his confidence in a contemporary piece, when the entire junior class performed their recital with tears of pride in their eyes, Scarlett remembered why she'd fallen in love with dance in the first place. But at night, alone in the guest room, she wrestled with impossible questions. How many families had been displaced for her dream? How many children had lost their homes so she could have her academy? The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. On a Thursday evening, she found herself in the academy's main studio after hours, moving through a routine she'd choreographed to work through her emotions. The music was melancholy, full of questions without answers, and her body translated the turmoil in her heart into movement. She didn't hear the door open, didn't notice she had an audience until she finished the piece and found Luca standing in the doorway. He looked haggard, older than his 32 years, but his eyes held the same reverence they'd always had when he watched her dance. "That was beautiful," he said softly, "and heartbreaking." "It's how I feel," Scarlett admitted, not moving from the center of the floor. "Torn between two worlds that don't seem compatible." Luca stepped into the studio but didn't come closer. "I have something to show you if you're willing." Curiosity overrode caution. "What is it?" "Come with me, please." They drove through the city in silence, Luca's hands steady on the wheel despite the tension radiating from his body. Scarlett watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by, wondering where he was taking her, what he thought could possibly change the fundamental incompatibility between his world and hers. They stopped in front of a modest community center in the neighborhood where the old dance academy had been. The building was new, but designed to blend with the surrounding architecture, and through the windows, Scarlett could see people inside, families, children, elderly residents. "What is this?" she asked. "The Rodriguez Community Center," Luca said quietly, "named after the family who owned the barber shop. Come inside." The interior was warm and welcoming, with a small cafe, computer stations, after-school program spaces, and Scarlett's breath caught, a beautiful dance studio with mirrors and professional flooring. "Mr. DeSantis!" A woman in her 50s approached them with a warm smile. "I wasn't expecting you tonight. Maria, this is Scarlett Williams." Scarlett, Maria Rodriguez. Her family owned the barbershop that was displaced. Scarlett felt her cheeks burn with shame, but Maria's smile never wavered. "The dancer. We've heard so much about you. My granddaughter Rosa takes classes at your academy. She talks about you constantly." I'm sorry," Scarlett stammered. "About your family's shop. I didn't know—" "Know what? That you were the reason we got a better opportunity," Maria laughed. "Mr. DeSantis didn't just buy our building, Mija. He set us up with a new shop in a better location, helped my son get a business loan, and gave us a stake in this community center. We're doing better than we ever dreamed." Scarlett looked at Luca in confusion. "I don't understand." "Let me show you around," Maria said, taking Scarlett's arm. "The computer lab is where Mrs. Chen teaches English classes to new immigrants. She loves it more than running that old grocery store. The kitchen is where the Morales family caters events. They're booked solid for the next 6 months. And the dance studio. That's where kids from the neighborhood can take free classes, just like at your academy." As they toured the facility, Scarlett met family after family who told similar stories. Yes, they'd been displaced, but they'd been given opportunities they never could have imagined. Better businesses, better homes, better futures for their children. But the compensation, Scarlett said to Luca when they were alone in the dance studio. Where did that money come from? Luca was quiet for a long moment. I've been moving the family business toward legitimate enterprises for the past year. The shipping company, the construction firm, the restaurant chain, all legal now. The money for this, for the compensation, it came from those profits. And the other money, the blood money, goes to families of people who were hurt by our past actions. Anonymous donations, college funds for children who lost parents, medical bills for people who were injured in our wars. Luca's voice was steady, but she could hear the pain underneath. It doesn't bring anyone back, doesn't undo the damage, but it's something. Scarlett sank onto the floor of the studio, overwhelmed. You're trying to make amends. I'm trying to become the man you see when you look at me, Luca said, sitting beside her but not touching. The man who deserves your love instead of just craving it. How long have you been planning this? Since the night I first watched you dance. You made me remember what it felt like to want to create instead of destroy. They sat in silence, surrounded by mirrors that reflected their complicated truth back at them. Scarlett could see herself, a woman caught between love and conscience, between dreams and reality. And she could see Luca, a man fighting to transform himself, to build something beautiful from the ashes of his past. The 17 people, she said quietly, the ones who died because of your orders. Luca's jaw tightened. I can't bring them back. I can't undo those choices, but I can make sure no one else dies because of me. How? By getting out, completely. I've been negotiating with the other families, turning over territories, selling off the illegal operations. In 6 months, the DeSantis name will be associated with legitimate business only. Scarlett turned to look at him fully. And your men? Your family? The ones who want to go legitimate will have jobs in the new companies. The ones who don't, they'll find other families to join. Luca's voice was heavy with the weight of those decisions. Some of them have been with us for decades. Leaving them behind is one of the hardest things I've ever done. But you're doing it anyway. For you. For us. For the chance to be the man I was supposed to be before everything went wrong. Scarlett felt tears prick her eyes. This beautiful, dangerous man was dismantling his entire world for her, trying to build something clean and good from the ruins of his past. It wasn't enough to erase what he'd done, but it was everything he could give. I love you, she said, the words coming out fierce and sure. I love the man you are and the man you're becoming. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if we do this, if we build a life together, it will be built on truth. No more secrets, no more hidden costs. I need to know that every beautiful thing in our life comes from clean hands. Luca reached for her then, cupping her face with infinite gentleness. I promise you, Bella Mia, everything we build from now on will be clean. Everything we create will be honest. I swear it on my father's grave. When he kissed her, it tasted like redemption and new beginnings, like a future they could build together without the weight of blood money or displaced families. It wasn't perfect. They would always carry the scars of their pasts. But it was real. It was honest. It was theirs. As they held each other in the dance studio of the community center, surrounded by the evidence of Luca's transformation, Scarlett knew she'd made her choice. Love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth growing with, worth fighting for, worth becoming better for. And Luciano DeSantis, for all his flaws and past mistakes, was worth everything. 2 years later, Scarlett stood in the wings of Lincoln Center, adjusting the costume of one of her students before the biggest performance of their young lives. The Scarlett Williams Academy for the Arts was presenting their annual showcase, and tonight's audience included talent scouts, critics, and proud families who had never imagined their children would dance on such a prestigious stage. Miss Williams, whispered Emma, now 10 and radiant with excitement, I can see my whole family in the audience. They're going to be so proud of you, Scarlett said, smoothing the girl's hair. Remember what we practiced. Breathe, feel the music, and let your heart guide your movement. Through the curtain she could see Luca in the front row, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes scanning the stage for her. Beside him sat Maria Rodriguez and her family, Mrs. Chen with her new husband, and dozens of other families whose lives had been transformed along with their own. The DeSantis name was now associated with legitimate business, charitable foundations, and community development. Luca's construction company had built 3 new community centers. His shipping business employed hundreds of people at fair wages, and his restaurants were known for their excellent food and ethical practices. It hadn't been easy. The transition from crime family to legitimate business had cost them allies and made them enemies. There had been threats, attempts at retaliation, and moments when Scarlett had wondered if they would survive the transformation. But they had, and they'd emerged stronger for it. "Places, everyone!" called the stage manager. Scarlett watched her students take their positions, her heart swelling with pride. These children, from the wealthiest neighborhoods and the poorest streets, had found something magical together. They'd learned that art could bridge any divide, that beauty could grow from the most unlikely soil. The music began, and Scarlett felt the familiar thrill of watching dreams take flight. Her students moved with the grace and passion she'd tried to instill in them, telling stories with their bodies, painting emotions across the stage. When the final bow was taken and the curtain fell, Scarlett was surrounded by excited children and proud parents. But through the chaos she found Luca's eyes, and the look he gave her made her heart skip. Later, after the reception and the congratulations and the tearful goodbyes, they found themselves alone in the empty theater. Luca had convinced the security guard to give them a few minutes, and now they stood center stage, surrounded by the ghosts of the evening's magic. "Dance with me," Luca said, extending his hand. "There's no music," Scarlett laughed. "There's always music when you move." She took his hand, and they began to sway together in the silence. It wasn't the desperate, passionate dancing of their early days, or the uncertain movements of their separation. This was something new, a dance of partnership, of shared dreams, of a future they'd built together from the ashes of their pasts. "Do you ever regret it?" Scarlett asked softly. "Giving up everything you knew for this life?" Luca spun her gently, then pulled her back against his chest. "I gave up everything I thought I wanted for everything I actually needed," he said. "How could I regret that? Even when it's hard? Even when the legitimate world moves slower than you're used to? Especially then." Luca's voice was warm with certainty. "Every honest dollar we earn, every clean deal we make, every child who finds their dreams in our academy, it's worth more than all the power I used to have." Scarlett tilted her head back to look at him. "And what about when people find out about your past? When they judge us for what you used to be?" "Then we show them who we are now," Luca said simply. "We show them what love can build when it's given the chance to grow." They danced in silence for a while. 2 souls who had found their way to each other through darkness and emerged into light. Around them, the theater held the echoes of 1,000 dreams, 1,000 stories of transformation and hope. "I have something for you," Luca said eventually, reaching into his jacket pocket. Scarlett's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Luca, I know we've talked about this," he said, dropping to one knee right there on the stage where dreams came true. "But I wanted to do it properly, in a place that represents everything we've built together." He opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away. Not ostentatious or flashy, but elegant and timeless, with a diamond that caught the stage lights and threw rainbows across the floor. "Scarlett Williams," Luca said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You saved my soul and showed me what it means to truly live. Will you marry me? Will you help me spend the rest of my life proving that love can transform anything?" Scarlett looked down at this man who had given up an empire for her, who had rebuilt his entire world to be worthy of her love, who had shown her that even the most broken people could find redemption if they were willing to fight for it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As Luca slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Scarlett felt the final pieces of their story click into place. They had started as strangers, a struggling dancer and a dangerous man watching from the shadows. They had become lovers, then partners, then builders of something beautiful and clean and true. Now they would become husband and wife, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The abandoned studio where their story began was long gone, replaced by a community center that served hundreds of families. But the magic that had sparked between them that first night, the recognition of 2 souls who could save each other, that would last forever. As they left the theater hand in hand, Scarlett knew that their greatest dance was just beginning, and this time they would never have to perform in the shadows again.